Avoidants are actually quite anxious inside. They do feel a ton of anxiety. No, they're not anxiously attached, but they are very anxious people. They have a lot of stress. The thing is, they haven't learned how to cope and manage with that stress. They haven't learned healthy ways to regulate themselves. The way they learned always stems back to childhood. This person was most likely emotionally neglected, and their feelings were very likely to be dismissed as children. So they learned to not communicate, and they learned that emotional intimacy leads to abandonment. So whenever their anxiety peaks, they've learned to run from problems, to dodge the problems, to suppress it, stick their head in the sand like an ostrich, not face problems, to avoid them. That's why they're called avoidant. Their method of dealing with emotional and relationship stress is to not deal with it at all. To take emotions and not take the time to process them, because that's just too painful. They'd rather suppress them and bury them and bottle up all those feelings. But doing so does create enormous amounts of anxiety. The anxiety is there, they just refuse to reflect on the anxiety and process it, which actually leads to more and more and more anxiety that can build up over time. And because avoidants have not learned healthy coping mechanisms, they haven't learned how to handle life stress, they tend to get overwhelmed quite easily. For example, when a relationship is going well, but something bad happens at the avoidant's work, or if a new family problem pops up, suddenly they're overwhelmed and they're looking to cut things out of their life to reduce the stress. And usually the first thing to go is the relationship. That's because this person has a ton of anxiety inside, and they just haven't learned the skills to manage and cope with that anxiety in a healthy way. Their behavior differs a lot from an anxious attacher, because an anxious attacher will try to control the outcome and earn the love of somebody out of fear of abandonment. The avoidant, however, feels that abandonment is inevitable, that when those stresses get triggered, it's just too much for them to do. They're not capable of sustaining the relationship. That failure of this relationship is just inevitable. That stress overwhelms them, so they do what they've learned. Take their feelings, suppress them, bury them, don't process them, run from the problems, and run from the relationship. It's not that they don't feel anxiety. Their lives are not just carefree and blissful. They actually have a lot of deep anxiety inside. And often severe avoidants will find addictions as ways to help them avoid processing these emotions. It's not uncommon for severe avoidants to be alcoholics or drug addicts or have a sex addiction, etc., etc. These are methods of them trying to avoid the deep anxiety that they don't want to face, to avoid all those painful emotions so they can keep themselves distracted, keep the dopamine flowing, and not have to face these problems. Serial dating, for example, is another way. They'll often monkey branch from relationship to relationship, always being in a relationship of some sort to keep the dopamine flowing and to distract themselves from having to face any of those negative emotions. But the anxiety is there, and what they do is they run from it rather than process it. And maladaptive behaviors, such as serial dating and addictions, are just methods of them trying to avoid the inner anxiety that they just don't want to process. So no, it's not that avoidants are just carefree and blissfully living their lives with their head in the sand. They have a lot of inner pain, unhealed attachment wounds, and deep, deep anxiety. They just choose to not heal the anxiety, and they choose not to reflect on it, which really, in the long run, makes it worse and creates a profound sense of loneliness within the avoidant as well. People often think that they're just living carefree. It just isn't the case. This is a person with a lot of inner turmoil. They just don't have the skills and haven't been willing to learn the skills to cope with it.